It's 1985. You're working two jobs. Your boots have holes in them. Your kids need school clothes. And every single morning, you're praying that the '74 Datsun in your driveway turns over just one more time. Then somebody walks up and says, "Brand new car. Warranty included. $39.90. You'd think they were lying. Everybody did. Until they weren't. This is the story of the most ridiculed automobile ever sold on American soil. A car that late-night comedians turned into a punchline. A car that got blown off a bridge, or so the story goes. A car built in a weapons factory by workers who drank plum brandy at lunch. And somehow, it changed the American car market forever. This is the Yugo. And it deserves a fair trial. To understand why this little hatchback from Eastern Europe landed like a thunderclap on American shores, you've got to understand the roads it drove onto. America in the early '80s was a country rebuilding its relationship with the automobile. The oil shocks of the '70s had rattled Detroit to its bones. Gas lines stretching around city blocks. Rationing. Families choosing between the tank and the grocery bill. And Detroit, big, proud, stubborn Detroit, was slow to answer the call for small, efficient cars. So the Japanese answered it instead. Toyota, Honda, Datsun. They came flooding in with vehicles that were practical, reliable, and reasonably priced. And Americans bought them by the millions. So many millions, in fact, that Washington got nervous. Import quotas went up. The Japanese automakers, smart as they were resourceful, pivoted upmarket. Toyota gave us Lexus. Honda gave us Acura. And suddenly, right at the very bottom of the American car market, there was a hole. A vacuum. A gap nobody in Detroit wanted to touch because the margins were razor thin and the headaches were real. The average new car in 1985 cost $12,000. But over 1.4 million vehicles priced under $6,000 sold that year. 13% of the entire market screaming for something affordable. Detroit looked at that number and shrugged. Someone else was paying attention. Now let's travel. Not to Tokyo. Not to Stuttgart. To a country most Americans at the time genuinely could not have located on a map. Yugoslavia. Communist by government. But not Soviet. That distinction mattered enormously. Marshal Josip Broz Tito had broken with Stalin back in 1948, told Moscow to mind its own business, and charted his own course. Yugoslavia became a carefully balanced tightrope act between East and West. And Washington loved it. A communist country that refused to fall in line with the Soviets? That was worth every bit of diplomatic support America could throw at it. Yugoslavia was also 6 republics stitched together under Tito's iron personality. Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro, Macedonia. 6 cultures, 6 histories, 6 industrial identities. And in the Serbian city of Kragujevac, about 60 miles south of Belgrade, stood a factory that had been making things since 1853. Originally a cannon foundry for the Royal Serbian Arsenal. By the 20th century, it was the Zastava industrial complex. And Zastava made weapons. AK-style rifles, machine guns, military hardware. But Tito had an idea. If this factory could build tools of war, it could build tools of peace. Cars. Not designed from scratch, licensed from Fiat. For 30 years, Zastava built Italian designs under Yugoslav hands. Simple, honest machines that a farmer in the countryside could fix himself with a basic wrench set on a Sunday afternoon. Then, in 1978, their own engineers quietly started sketching something new. They started with the bones of a Fiat 128, shortened the wheelbase, restyled the body, dropped in a tiny 903 cubic centimeters engine making 45 horsepower. They gave it a name that meant something simple and proud. Yugo. South. The first prototype was reportedly handed to President Tito himself. He drove it, presumably nodded, and then died 2 years later. Make of that what you will. Production launched November 28, 1980. The Yugo went on sale in 70 countries. At its peak, 200,000 units a year rolled off that assembly line. By Eastern European standards, This was a genuine industrial triumph. Compared to the East German Trabant, a car literally constructed from compressed cotton waste and synthetic resin, the Yugo was practically a Cadillac. But nobody in Kragujevac was thinking about America yet. That required a very particular kind of man. Malcolm Bricklin. If this whole story has a protagonist, it's him. And protagonist is a generous word. One automotive journalist described him as brash, bombastic, and pathologically prone to betting the farm on impossible automotive ventures. That might be the most charitable thing ever written about him. Bricklin was a Philadelphia-born serial entrepreneur with two extraordinary talents in near-perfect balance: finding cheap cars in foreign countries and going spectacularly bankrupt. He'd done it before. More than once. In 1968, at just 29 years old, he founded Subaru of America, importing the Subaru 360, a car so microscopically small it didn't legally qualify as an automobile under federal standards, which conveniently meant it didn't have to meet safety requirements. He imported 10,000 of them, all white, all with red leather interiors. The marketing tagline was, and I promise I'm not making this up, cheap and ugly does it. 0 to 60 took somewhere in the neighborhood of 37 seconds. One magazine reviewer noted it took most of the afternoon. Consumer Reports declared it not acceptable. Sales cratered. Bricklin sold his stake. And Subaru of America, freed from his management, became enormously successful. There's a lesson there. He didn't learn it. Next came the Bricklin SV1, a gullwing sports car built in New Brunswick, Canada, funded by the provincial government. The gullwing doors famously refused to open or close with any reliability. 2,900 cars were built before the whole thing collapsed. The project cost the Canadian province $23 million and cost the sitting premier his job. Then came rebadged Fiats. That deal unraveled in '83. By May of 1984, Malcolm Bricklin was broke again. He had 120 days to find a new car, or his company would cease to exist. So, his people went looking for the cheapest automobile on the planet. The United States government wanted this deal to happen. Washington had been propping up Yugoslavia's independent communist experiment for decades. A deal that kept Belgrade economically tied to the American market was good foreign policy. Henry Kissinger served as a senior advisor on the project. Lawrence Eagleburger, former Undersecretary of State, sat on the Yugo America board. This wasn't just a car deal. This was Cold War diplomacy, with a manual transmission. Zastava identified 535 modifications needed to meet American standards. Bigger engine, a 1.1-liter making 55 horsepower. Catalytic converter. Proper seat belts. Carburetor tuned for unleaded fuel. The factory was partially overhauled in 6 months. 6 months. For 535 changes. On a car headed for the most demanding consumer market on Earth. Nobody had time to do it right. Bricklin needed the car yesterday. Zastava needed the export revenue desperately. The State Department wanted its diplomatic win. So they did what everyone does when the clock is running and the pressure is on. They cut corners. And hoped nobody noticed. August 25, 1985. Manhattan's Tavern on the Green. Because Malcolm Bricklin did not do anything quietly, the Yugo GV, Great Value, was unveiled with full fanfare in one of New York City's most famous restaurants. The GV, Great Value. They named the thing Great Value. The response broke every projection. Over 7,500 pre-orders before a single car had touched American pavement. One report claims more than 1,000 units sold in a single day. Demand crushed supply immediately. Zastava could barely ship 40,000 cars a year. America was swallowing them whole. The Associated Press coined the phrase Yugomania. In that first partial year, 1985, 3,895 sold. In 1986, first full year, 35,959. For an unknown brand from a communist country most Americans couldn't point to on a globe, those numbers were extraordinary. And the value proposition was overwhelming in a way that's hard to overstate today. A brand new 1986 Toyota Tercel, $5,798. A Honda Civic hatchback, $5,479. A Chevrolet Chevette, $5,959. The Yugo? $3,990. Nearly $2,000 cheaper than anything else with 4 wheels and a warranty. For a wide swath of working-class Americans, the math was brutally simple. A brand new Yugo with a warranty, or a used car with 100,000 miles and somebody else's cigarette burns on the seat. A lot of people chose the Yugo. And honestly, that wasn't irrational. 1987 was the mountaintop. 48,812 Yugos sold in the United States. 5 models on the lot. The base GV. The GVS with a mild body kit. The GVC with a glass sunroof. The GVL with upgraded upholstery. And the range-topping GVX, 1.3-liter engine, 5-speed gearbox, alloy wheels, rally-style fog lights, and what's Estava's own marketing materials described with breathtaking optimism as a plush interior. For one shining moment, the Yugo was the 3rd best-selling European import in America. Brooklyn was dreaming the big dream now. Sales targets of 100,000 units by 1990. Plans to import a second model. A 4-door from Malaysia. That deal collapsed when Mitsubishi blocked the export. Another Brooklyn venture. Another implosion. Practically a business model at this point. But here's where the story shifts. Where the comedy starts turning into something heavier. Something sadder. Let's get under the hood. The heart of the American Yugo was a Fiat-derived inline 4-cylinder. 1.1 liters. About 68 cubic inches. Single overhead cam. Aluminum head sitting on a cast iron block. 55 horsepower total. For context, a decent riding lawnmower makes about 25 horsepower. The Yugo made double that. And it was responsible for moving 1,860 pounds of automobile down an American interstate at highway speed. You could hear the effort. The car next to you could hear the effort. Here's the irony, though, and this gets lost in all the jokes. The engine architecture itself was genuinely well-designed. Aurelio Lampredi, the legendary engineer who had previously penned Ferrari racing engines, created the original Fiat 128 engine family back in 1969. Transverse-mounted, belt-driven overhead cam, front-wheel drive. That engine family would remain in production in various forms until roughly 2010. The problem was that the version fitted to American Yugos was already 16 years old when it arrived. An engine designed in the late 60s, wearing 1985's clothing. And then there was the timing belt. If one mechanical detail defined the Yugo's American reputation above all others, this was it. That rubber belt needed replacement somewhere around 30 to 40,000 miles. Skip the service and it would snap. And when it snapped, because this was an interference engine, the crankshaft kept spinning while the camshaft stopped dead. Pistons slammed into stationary valves like a freight train hitting a parked car. A broken timing belt didn't mean a tow truck. It meant a destroyed engine. In Europe, everybody knew about timing belts. Standard maintenance. Routine as an oil change. But in America, most engines ran timing chains, heavy metal links that lasted the life of the car. Nobody expected a rubber belt. Nobody told the buyers. And the dealers? The dealers netted less than $200 gross profit on a base GV sale. At those margins, customer education was a luxury nobody could afford. 4-speed manual gearbox. No automatic available until 1990, and when it finally came, it was a 3-speed Renault unit borrowed from another era. 0 to 60 in 16 to 17 seconds. Top speed 86 miles per hour. Slowest car on any American road. Fuel economy was decent, 24 city, 29 highway. The car weighed 1,860 pounds. Half a modern sedan. Great for gas mileage. Genuinely dangerous in any meaningful collision. Late-night television found the Yugo in 1986 and never let go. How do you double the value of a Yugo? Fill it with gas. What comes in every Yugo owner's manual? A bus schedule. What's the difference between a Yugo and a golf ball? You can drive a golf ball 200 yards. The jokes were funny. They were also lethal. Nobody buys the punchline. Sales in 1988, 31,545. A 35% drop from peak. Dealers were growing restless. The margins on a base GV were thin enough to cut yourself on. 1989, 10,576. A 67% free fall in a single year. Desperate, Brooklyn introduced a convertible for $4,990, a sub-$5,000 ragtop that, with its top folded down, actually looked surprisingly decent. It barely moved the needle. Dealers started offering brand new Yugos at $29.95. 2-for-1 promotions appeared. Buy one, get one free. Yugos were handed out as gag gifts. One automotive journalist's friend reportedly bought two, one to drive, one to keep for parts. He apparently loved both of them. And then the Hyundai Excel showed up. In 1986, Hyundai landed the Excel on American shores at $4,995. Just $1,000 more than the Yugo. Here's the thing, the early Excel was, by nearly every honest account, about as roughly built as the Yugo. Consumer Reports wasn't kind. Reliability was questionable at best. But there was one enormous difference. South Korea was not about to dissolve into civil war. Hyundai had something Zastava would never get. Time. Political stability. A functioning industrial policy. A government committed to seeing the automotive sector succeed. The Excel's problems were fixable because the country building it wasn't coming apart at the seams. Zastava would get none of those things. And what happened next would make everything else irrelevant. September 22, 1989. A Friday evening. Rain coming down across the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Winds gusting to 48 miles per hour. Leslie and Pleuer, 31 years old, a waitress from Royal Oak, was driving her blue 1987 Yugo northbound across the Mackinac Bridge. Nearly 5 miles of steel and cable suspended high above the Straits of Mackinac. She was heading to visit her boyfriend in St. Ignace. Her car struck a raised center grate, swerved left into oncoming traffic, veered back right, hit the curb railing, skidded along the outer guardrail for about 40 feet, struck a vertical suspension cable, and flipped over the side. The Yugo fell 170 feet into the straits. It took 8 days for divers to locate the car, perched on a ledge 150 feet below the surface, crushed almost beyond recognition. The investigation determined that speed was the primary factor. She'd been traveling at roughly 60 miles per hour. The wind was a contributing element, but investigators were clear. The Mackinac Bridge Authority has stated on record that no vehicle has ever been simply blown off the structure by wind alone. But the public didn't care about investigative nuance. The story that spread, the one that stuck, was simpler, crueler. The wind blew a Yugo off a bridge. A woman was dead. There was nothing funny about it. And the joke got told anyway. Tito had been dead since 1980. For a decade, institutional inertia and a rotating collective presidency had held 6 republics together through sheer organizational momentum. But by the late 80s, the fault lines were fracturing. Slobodan Milosevic rose to power in Serbia, riding a wave of ethnic nationalism. The other republics watched with alarm. In 1991, the shooting started. Slovenia declared independence. Then Croatia. Then Bosnia. The Yugoslav wars would grind on for most of the decade and claim over 100,000 lives, displacing millions more. For Zastava, the impact was immediate and total. Remember that supply chain? The one that stretched proudly across every single Yugoslav republic? Electronics from Slovenia. Interior components from Croatia. Brake systems from Croatia. Engine wiring from Bosnia. Mirrors from Macedonia. Assembly in Serbia. When those republics became warring nations, nations actively shelling each other, the supply chain didn't slow down. It ceased to exist entirely. You cannot source seatbelts from a country at war with your own. United Nations sanctions cut off exports. The European Union piled on with its own restrictions. The factory went silent. Workers survived by growing their own food on subsistence plots while technically remaining on payroll only to keep health benefits. When wages came at all, hyperinflation had already destroyed their value. Yugo America filed for bankruptcy in 1992. Final year on record, 1,412 cars sold. Total American run, 141,651 Yugos. The EPA arrived with a recall notice covering roughly 126,000 vehicles, falsified emissions data. The end, official and unceremonious. But Yugoslavia wasn't finished with Zastava. Kosovo. NATO launched a 78-day air campaign against Serbian military and industrial targets. Zastava, still manufacturing weapons alongside whatever automotive production remained, was designated a legitimate military objective. What happened next is one of the more extraordinary footnotes in this whole story. The workers formed a human shield. They gathered at the factory gates. They issued an open letter to NATO command, providing their exact geographic coordinates, their factory's precise location, and stated they would remain on site as long as hostilities continued. These were working people trying to protect the place that had employed their families across 3 generations. The building their grandfathers had walked into. The building where their children might one day work. NATO bombed it anyway. April 9th and 12th of 1999. A dozen bombs hit the Zastava complex. Over 120 workers were wounded. Factory buildings that had survived German occupation in the Second World War were reduced to molten steel and scorched concrete. The damage estimate reached 1.2 billion German marks. The city's shared power plant was destroyed alongside it, cutting heat and electricity to 200,000 people. Schools went dark. Hospitals went dark. Homes went cold in the Serbian spring. 36,000 workers unemployed. 64,000 dependents without income. Production crawled back after 2000. Minor cosmetic updates, new bumpers, revised dashboard. In 2002, Bricklin actually signed another deal with Zastava to relaunch the Yugo in America as the ZMW. Projected 60,000 sales. He pivoted instead to importing Chinese Chery automobiles. That also collapsed. Of course it did. In 2008, Fiat took over the Kragujevac factory. On November 11, 2008, the 794,428th Yugo rolled off the assembly line. A red car. Sticker on the rear glass read, "Goodbye. No more." So, why did the Yugo really disappear? The simple answer, bad car, jokes killed it, is satisfying. It's also incomplete. The real answer is a highway pileup of catastrophes arriving simultaneously from every direction. A desperately rushed launch by a serial entrepreneur operating on a 120-day deadline. A factory workforce that had never once competed in an open global market. A design already a full generation out of date when the first American unit shipped. Consumers conditioned by Japanese reliability expecting the same from a car priced at 1/3 the cost. A competitor arriving from a stable, rapidly industrializing nation at just $1,000 more. American media and late-night television recognizing the easiest target in automotive history and unloading on it without mercy. And then, the complete dissolution of a multi-ethnic nation into 6 warring successor states. International sanctions. Hyperinflation. NATO missiles falling through the factory roof. Any single one of those things might have been survivable. Together, there was never a chance. But here's what matters. Here's what every automotive historian ought to acknowledge. The Yugo proved something. It proved, with 50,000 annual sales at the absolute bottom of the market, that there was an enormous, underserved population of working-class Americans who desperately wanted an affordable new car. That they would choose an unknown brand from a country they'd never visited, built under a political system they didn't understand, if the price was right and the proposition was honest. A new car for the price of a used car. That insight didn't die in Kragujevac. Hyundai built a global empire on it. So did Kia. The entire modern Korean automotive industry owes an unacknowledged debt to the little hatchback from Serbia. The early Excel was arguably every bit as troubled as the Yugo. The difference was time and stability. 2 things South Korea had and Yugoslavia never got. Today, roughly 400 Yugos remain registered in the United States. In Serbia, nearly 60,000 were still running years after production ended, mostly later-build models from the early 2000s, kept alive by people who simply needed transportation and had figured out every mechanical secret the car contained. And something unexpected happened to the American Yugos. They became collectible. A 1990 Yugo Cabrio, the convertible that barely sold when new, crossed the auction block in 2025 for over $15,000, more than triple its original sticker price. Owners gather at rallies, race them, maintain online parts registries and databases, the kind of fierce, devoted community that only a genuinely weird, genuinely unique car can inspire. In 2025, a Serbian professor secured rights to the Yugo name, partnering with a designer to create a modern retro-inspired version for the 2027 Belgrade Expo. Whether it happens is anyone's guess. Brooklyn promised the Yugo's return at least twice. Neither materialized. Some things stay gone. The Yugo was never just a car. Every single one that rolled off that assembly line in Kragujevac contained pieces of 6 different republics. Croatian plastics, Slovenian electronics, Bosnian wiring, Macedonian mirrors, Serbian hands assembling it all together. It was quite literally held together by Yugoslavia itself. When the country came apart, so did the car. The Zastava factory has stood on that ground since 1853. It has outlasted empires, 2 world wars, communism, civil war, hyperinflation, and cruise missiles. It's still there today, making fiats. But the older workers remember when it made something that was theirs. A small, loud, impractical, deeply imperfect automobile that somehow crossed an ocean and put working-class Americans in brand-new cars for the first time in their lives. $3,990. A brand-new car with a warranty. Sometimes the punchline deserves a second look.